right? So, before we jump into a demo, these are, I suppose we've scoured the world over the last, having many conversations with many customers. And, Nick and I have said, well, we've been beating this drum for a while, but what do we recommend you do? And some of these things you might have already done. We've seen Microsoft proactively start telling customers, we are going to do this on your behalf. We don't care what you're doing, right? We've seen that, right? We talked ad nauseum about data breaches and the cost of data breaches and can you afford to risk that? But these are the things that we believe that if you did after this call, right, it will drastically improve what your current status is from a security posture perspective. And I mean, do we have to still talk about this, Nick?
I think, sadly, we do, because it's still not religion for people, and it needs to be, Al.
It does. It does. I mean, for those that understand what multi-factor authentication is, I'm sure you do, because you've on some sort of social media platform, and even Google and AWS talks about two-factor authentication. We do know that Microsoft is enforcing, because you can switch on multi-factor authentication, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're enforcing it. I think it's October sometime. If anyone heads over to Azure, you'll see a pop-up that says, we are enforcing multi-factor authentication on all accounts, especially admin accounts, from a specific date. I think it's the 20th of October. So you have no option but to make sure that multi-factor authentication is configured and switched on for, in this case, we're talking about traditional identities. We haven't gotten to the other types of identities that you have inside of your organization. Conditional access, Nick. I suppose this is the risk engine that we've been we have an unrequited love for. And yes, some of these things require additional licenses. And it's like buying insurance, right? You want healthcare insurance or you want life cover. It's only valuable when something happens, right? Otherwise, it's sort of a grudge purchase because you throw a lot of money at it. We believe that, and I think Merrill confirmed that you need one license, right? And then all of it is switched on, right?
Merrill Fernando.
Yes, he's literally come out and says, well, for those who are not on a P2 plan with Azure, you need one P1 plan, and then it switches on the lights for the entire street, right? So have a look at conditional access and what it means and the multiple components of that. It's not just about human-based identity. There are other types of identities, and have a look at that risk engine. And we've got slides, we've always presented on this around, it sits in the middle, and everything in and out of your organization can be risk profiled. And it's in the Microsoft Cybersecurity Reference Architecture, and we love that very comprehensive slide deck, and it shows you what it means. So if you don't know what conditional access, just Google and have a look at how to switch that on for not only applications that live in the Microsoft 365 world, but also applications that live inside of Entra that's not a Microsoft app. Identity protection, Nick.
Gone are the days that we could create a user and Active Directory in the inside of our firewall, and, well, nobody knew about it unless I would brag about my same account name at the family barbecue. In those days, people thought I was strange with my 8-character name when they all had first names and last names. What we have now is cloud-based identities. And the problem with a cloud-based identity is that, well, if I have an email address, it's easy to find out what my identity is. And so therefore, why don't I start attacking the password of that identity with, I don't know, something that's easy to guess? Wouldn't it be nice if we had some kind of level of protection in cloud where I could find out that my password is too simple, that my password has been leaked, that in fact my credentials have been used somewhere else, or that my username and password has been used, gasp, in North Korea. Now, what is Kim Jong-un doing with your username and password, you ask? Well, with a conditional access policy, you would choose to not have countries that don't make sense be allowed to sign in from, gosh, that's a lot of English right there, and to close the loop on that. If someone from a country that is doing something dodgy to identity is doing something dodgy, then we as administrators and users can be told about that and, of course, be protected from that. And depending on the SKU, as Al said, often completely automatically.
It's great functionality out of the box. Throw some dollars at it, and you can have identity protection. Privileged identity management. I remember when this was a grudge purchase, Nick, and strangely enough, the last 5 customers that I've dealt with this year all have it enabled by default.
Why don't you tell us what this is in human
terms, right? So, the rule of thumb, and Microsoft has been saying this for as long as I can remember, you shouldn't have any global admins. And when we talk about it, repeatedly, and we literally say that. Now, in the Zero Trust world, we talk about least privilege. We've had least privilege in the SharePoint world since the beginning of time. And in NIST, privileged identity management is a prerequisite. You have to have it. And in the old days, there were products that used to do this on top of Active Directory, where you have an account, alistair.pugin@contoso.com, and that's just a user account. I've got no privileges to do anything. But I'm a SharePoint administrator, and I need to do admin functions. In the old days, we'd go in and go, here's a user, it's got a license. Okay, let's go down to the roles, and what we're going to do is we're going to give you the SharePoint administrator role. You're not a global admin, but you're a SharePoint admin role. That account has SharePoint guard rights as long as it lives, right? And that's a problem, because if that identity, again, we come back to identity, is compromised, it means whatever role's been assigned to that identity has access to. So if I'm a SharePoint administrator, I can delete SharePoint sites. Data loss, right? Gone, right? I could literally destroy SharePoint Online. I can delete all the sites. It doesn't matter. With privileged identity management, you elevate the privilege of a least privileged account to perform that function, usually within a window of time that says you can have that privilege to perform that admin function over a 4-hour period. And then that privilege gets revoked. So it's important that you understand the value of this, because then no global admins, 0 global admins, and you've got privileged identity management running so that if you need to perform an administrative task, you even have an approval process where someone needs to approve that. So even if the identity was compromised, someone needs to hit that button and say, elevate that privilege. And if it's, oh shit, we didn't know that this person needs that, phone the person and say, oh, well, I didn't do it. Okay, deny the request, reset the password, reinforce MFA, and you've thwarted a possible attack inside of your environment.
Thwarted, such a strong word this time of day.
Well, the next one talks about, and I don't know how true this is, Nick. I mean, we talk about strong password policies.
It's old guidance, Al.
It is, right?
Actually, if we can be true to the slide, the best password guidance is don't have passwords.
And Microsoft actually says you shouldn't, if you've got MFA and you've got some sort of biometric authentication, passwords mean nothing, because
Correct.
Chances are the password can be brute force attacked, right? So,
right.
And people have been complaining about remembering. We've seen the memes. Your password needs to be 12 characters. It needs alphanumeric. You can't have trailing 1, 2, 3s, and it needs some sort of asterisk. And then, it confuses the users and they hate their life and they go to SSP, self-service password, SSPR, and then they go through that process, and it takes the CEO of a company to say this is bullshit, right? So yes, think about it. If you're still in the world of password, enforce the strong password policies, but if you switch on the other things, passwords mean nothing. So we're actually going to delete the slide, Nick. Application proxy, Entra ID application proxy.
Let me take this one.
Yeah.
Consider that you still have your grandfather's application on your network that requires Active Directory authentication or some form of authentication that your grandfather was using. So how do you get your grandfather's applications to cloud, Al? And I know you lie awake thinking about this. And the answer is use a modern mechanism that can proxy that application to cloud, to a cloud-managed endpoint. However, since Entra ID is in the name, and that's a hint, we can use our Entra ID credentials with conditional access and with identity protection to authenticate to those crusty old apps that our grandfather, don't know what the old codger is doing in my network, but all those apps are there because of him. And now we can authenticate to them securely.
It's that Skype for Business people, right, that still have link code running in a building somewhere, right, because their telephony system is connected to it, right, and they've got some application that works off it that runs 40 people in a call center and they can't do anything. Those people, Nick, those are the people we are looking to speak to using this specific slide.
That's a modern slide, though. That's pretty timeless.
But when we looked at your take-home slide, like the commonalities, and we talk about monitoring and something like impossible travel policy, right? That's a risky login, right? So we should be monitoring and auditing things like sign in, right? The first thing a SOC analyst is going to do, they're going to look at a suspicious activity. What did they access while they were in? And normally, by the time that they find out someone is in, they've been in for quite some time, right? And then you run KQL and you go look around and find out, well, what did this person access over the last month? And that lives inside of access logs. And it shouldn't be a reactive thing. It should be something that you do every single day.
That's right.
Right? And if you are prepared to spend $10,000 a month on that single security compute unit using Copilot, Security Copilot, Copilot for Security, whatever they're calling it today, because we've seen name changes and we're going to see some more. Yes, that'll help you. But in the absence of spending money on that, monitor logs, access logs. It's simple. It's right there, right? And then RBAC. RBAC's not old new. Well, it's not new, Nick.
That's true. And RBAC really simply means make sure that your users and administrators only have access to the resources that they need in order to do their jobs. And that's as complicated as it is, Al.
Well, non-human identities also fall under this, right?
This is true.
So
we'll change that definition then to users, administrators, and the non-humans amongst us.
Yeah. And it's always interesting because when we look at, and I suppose we've lamented on about, do you even know how many applications and application registrations you have in your tenant? I looked at my dev tenant, I think it was 2 weeks ago. And I think at the beginning of the year, we started talking about this. Do you even know? I've got 871 application registrations in a dev tenant, Nick. It's not production.
Surprise.
There's nothing production in there. The application registrations that I've done is 7. I've manually added 7 app registrations, right? And we'll talk about the deployment tokens and static web apps, which is quite scary from a DevOps perspective.
Yep.
It's fascinating. But really, you need to understand that it's not just about human-based identities. Service principals, managed identities, everything that needs to read from the Graph API lives inside of this world. And you can do RBAC stuff on that. And it's important to understand what that looks like. Identity governance, Nick, it's again one of those slides that talk to you throwing more dollars at Microsoft to govern your identities better.
If only there was a way to do something about everything that you've just mentioned in the last 3 slides, right? And this is that.
Yeah, so have a look at Microsoft's sort of reinvented the intro word. We're still sad that they're no longer calling it Azure Active Directory, right? It's a now split. It's a separate product. It's not what do you call it? The 20-year-old.
So 25-year-old attack platform. And
that one, Active Directory.
The nice thing about Entra, at least, is that a lot of the things that we needed within that 25-year-old attack platform were extra bolt-on bits. And as you say, Al, if we've bought these bits, then we can automate user creation and we can do things like object attestation. Someone in the business had to say, why is this thing here? Should these groups still exist? Should the group members for these groups still be what they are? We've been wondering that for many of the boy band groups in the last 10 years that have resurfaced, and we think, should they still be doing this? You can ask the same questions about the many, many teams and groups that you have within your business.
And then, we talk about secure application registration. And funny enough, I've been working with a customer for about the last 3 months, and they're doing deploying applications and doing application registrations and having a mechanism from a managed service provider perspective where, just because you've got the rights, I can go and I can see everything in the intrablade, and I can go and I can register a new application and attach it to a single page application from a web app perspective, and then take that deployment token or that management token and put it into a DevOps repo pipeline and then deploy to that without having any security. Have that extra step where people who have the rights to actually create applications, or at least create a registration for an application, make sure that you have some sort of approval mechanism or there's some sort of security around that.